Please welcome on stage Chris Stiles, VP of Supply Chain Management North America at Nissan. Please, Chris. Chris joined Nissan in 2002, currently responsible for all supply chain activities across production parts, finished vehicle logistics in US, Mexico, and Canada. So welcome, Chris. We also have Stephanie Dix, VP of Operations and Global Logistics at Battery Recycling and Circular Economy Specialist, Cirba Solutions. So welcome, Stephanie. You're responsible for multiple warehouse facilities, day-to-day operations, expanding Cirba's growing transportation fleet as well. So plenty to get in there. And last but certainly not least, we have Darren Epps. So welcome, Darren, Senior Director, Advanced Vehicle Technology at Ryder, playing a key role in Ryder's alternative fuel strategy solutions. So looking forward to getting into that with you. So welcome once again. A round of applause, please. So let's get straight into it, ladies and gentlemen. Chris. Whilst many of us are talking about EV and EV supply chains being something new, Nissan has been building electric vehicles in the US for nearly a decade now. So, a bit of a softball here. What are some of the key lessons you've learned, major challenges, complexities you've had to overcome during that time?
You're right. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years since we started doing EVs here in the US and then other parts of the world. I think we've obviously learned a lot. I think starting out, there was a lot of unknowns, obviously, on whether it's inbound logistics challenges, the cadences that you have to use for moving batteries, even, for example, especially getting them from supply to all the way into the manufacturing facility. We've found a lot of ways to automate a lot of that, especially once it's within our control. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. In the beginning, it was much more traditional, old school kind of inbound parts logistics. On the outbound side, obviously infrastructure is key. You've got to be able to make sure that you've got the right charging infrastructure at the key locations, and so as we went along and simultaneously kind of improving and developing, the product itself, we found that, there's maybe parts of the infrastructure that weren't sufficient in the beginning. You get challenges, you get problems, EV, if it runs out of charge or whatever, how do you quickly get it back on track? So really just kind of beefing up that infrastructure over the past 10 years within our logistics operations is really kind of the way it's evolved. But obviously with what's coming, it's going to continue to evolve. So.
Absolutely. My next question, you've led perfectly into it. The operations are clearly well established now, but how do you expect them to change over time as Nissan's EV product range and offering grows and volumes increase?
I think as far as, just from a pure volume standpoint is going to drive a lot of the needed change. Obviously, we've been producing EVs for a long time, but never at a massive volume like we're going to see, in the next 10 years. So that's going to really enhance need for a lot more infrastructure. I think telematics are going to come into play much faster even, than they're already advancing quite a bit. But I think that's going to be a critical part of utilization of telematics and communication, with the vehicles themselves to help really facilitate the logistics side. Once we start moving the cars. On the inbound side, I don't know that it's, in the short term, I don't see it changing all that much. Beyond that, obviously, I think everybody's working on what's going to change, not just within their network, their manufacturing control, but how is this going to interact with all the other OEMs and newcomers that are going to all of a sudden be almost saturating the distribution market. So I think it's still quite a bit yet to be seen, but obviously working closely with all the supplier partners and really hoping, that they're coming along and putting their brains behind, what they see as well. So.
Yeah, excellent, and plenty of points there we'll delve into as the discussion progresses. Darren, I want to jump to you, and in that last session when we talked about the pace of change, this transition, from your perspective, what are you hearing from your customers and the wider industry in terms of, are we still at an information gathering stage, an education stage, or are people at the point of now investing in electric vehicles and electrification of fleets?
Yeah, I think we're at the former, more of the information stage. Our customers are coming to us and say, look, I got ESG goals, not necessarily for next year, but 2030. How are we going to get there? And so that's our role, is to figure out what that roadmap looks like. And it has to be operationally efficient. It's got to fit in the application. It's got to be cost efficient. It still has to work on a TCO model. And then, of course, the sustainability piece of it. So we work hand in hand to try to let that roadmap play out. But I think majority of our customers are in the exploration or the onesie twosies. Let's get our hands on it a little bit, which I think is smart with the new technology. We do have a handful of customers that have gone all in. They want to have all the bumps. They want to learn along the way. And the crowd before them will just learn from their bruises. So I think you see a little bit of mix, but mostly on the informational side.
And how are you balancing then in the development of your own product services, a kind of a rider regarding EVs? Is it being sort of market-led from those discussions, or are you having to take the solutions to the market and sort of preempting what those needs might be?
Yeah, I think partnerships have been key. And so what we've done is we've established partnerships on the charging side, on the grant side. That's such a huge piece of this, as we heard this morning. And then we have great relationships, obviously, with the OEMs. So with the new technology, customers rightfully want to try before they really get into a lease. And so working with the OEMs to get demos, 1, 2, 3 month demos, just to get people comfortable with the technology. From there, I appreciate what Dr. Ward said this morning. Electrification is not the magic bullet for everything. We don't see electrification as synonymous with sustainability. It's going to take a lot of technologies. I think some of those were mentioned this morning. A long-haul tractor, electrification, that application doesn't work today. So, we're looking at anything that makes sense, that can get us to near zero or zero emission for our customers. And so that could be biofuels or hydrogen. So look at really all of the above strategy. When you have a customer base like we do, number of vehicles like we do, there's not really a one-size-fits-all.
And that might bring its own complexities as well, and perhaps we'll get more into that later on. So, Stephanie, welcome to the panel. Cirba Solutions had quite an eventful last few months, not least the fact that when we started talking, it was a different company name. So perhaps for our audience, you can share a little bit of information about Cirba's recent journey from where you were, where you are today, and what the plans are moving forward.
Yes, happy to. So Cirba Solutions is a new name and it's a new brand entity, but the companies that created it have over 60 years of combined battery experience in recycling. So you have Historic Battery Solutions, which is probably the name that you saw originally, who had predominantly focused on battery sorting, logistics, traceability, disassembly. And then we have Retrieve Technologies on the processing side, who also focuses on reuse and retesting. And I don't know if a lot of people are aware, but Retrieve for decades was the only domestic lithium-ion and lithium primary processor. So we have a really solid platform with operational efficiencies in that field already. So we are really excited about what is happening right now for ourselves as a company and this industry.
Yeah, fantastic. And I keep referring to the session before, but it was so perfectly placed. So whoever put the agenda together, anyway. In terms of the growth rate, is there going to be the capacity in the recycling sector for EV batteries? Is it going to be able to keep pace? Where are we at?
So in the near term right now, we are definitely on target because we're really just seeing scrap and R&D batteries. The deficit will really be in the next 10 years, and internally we're planning for that. We are scaling up our production lines, and we're planning massive expansion with new facilities across the United States. So we'll be ready for it.
Good to hear. Perfect. So this session is about scaling up capabilities and supply chains for electric vehicles, for batteries. With such rapid market growth and the pace of transition, this can often lead to inefficient practices and operations. So how are you and how can the industry collaborate and ensure that supply chains remain efficient from the get-go, competitive? Chris, I'll start with you.
First of all, I think, we have to continue to overcome the challenges that are out there today, because they're just kind of the basic challenges that are within the supply chain, whether it's capacity or drivers or just really resources to support not only what we have today, but as you start seeing some of this expected growth. First of all, we have to find ways to overcome the underlying kind of just blocking and tackling of what it takes to move things. And then from there, I think it is going to be more around beefing up infrastructures and services that are not so well known to the manufacturers right now, as far as what the true breadth can be for those types of services. It's going to be really aligning with the partners on what we see as a need, what the industry sees as a need, and then what they can do as far as bringing in investments and making strong plans to really be able to support it.
Yeah, and you mentioned partnerships there, and the same question applies to you. As you're, Stephanie, scaling up your own fleets and your operations, you have that scale, and you say you will be ready. So how are you preparing to make sure that those are as efficient as possible moving forward to support your own supply chains and your own operations, but also support those of your customers?
Internally for our operations, we focus a lot on driving excellence, and everything we do is kind of with lean thinking. But broad scheme, keeping efficiencies, it has to be collaboration, working with manufacturers. Like, they need to have in mind when they're making the batteries, recycling at the end, so that we have easier tear down and can get the raw materials we need to out of it.
Yeah, I would just echo what I think the key theme and sort of the theme of the morning now afternoon is just the partnership. So I spent part of my career in the utility industry on the electric transportation side, and there was partners, there were people that were talking to each other that never had to talk before. So utility and an OEM, it was like a Nissan, and that they never had to talk in 100 years. So you do have to kind of break through those barriers and establish those relationships. I think that's going to be critical when you talk about a transformation like what we're seeing today.
Great. And Chris, from your perspective, obviously managing the total supply chain at Nissan, when we break it down into sector, a certain sector is easier than others, be it inbound, be it the intralogistics or the, we'll get to afterparts later, but finished vehicles, the different complexities, which from your perspective has been kind of easy to manage or more challenging to manage?
They're just different, right? Some days the inbound side may be running much smoother and therefore easier than the outbound and vice versa. But I think, inbound, at the end of the day, we're accustomed to dealing with all of these types of parts and commodities and components, and really, I don't know that it's really going to make it more difficult. I think it's just going to be a bit different. On the outbound side is probably going to be the one that creates the bigger challenge when it comes to all the talk around infrastructure. And then on the back end, the recycling side of it too. I mean, it's that's something can be an afterthought in a lot of areas that are working on these types of future programs, but it's totally got to be in the whole plan, because you really got to look at the whole life cycle of not just the car. Now you've got the back end, what's going to happen with that very costly component, right? So I think so.
I want to focus my attention on the batteries themselves, and Stephanie, I'll bring your kind of expertise here in terms of handling batteries. Can you outline some of the key considerations and elements necessary, for example, related with the dangerous goods, be it kind of on the inbound side, handling damaged products, or as we'll get to, expired products?
So I think anything when you deal with hazmat, it's kind of a specialty, right? So I think, unfortunately, all of us have seen, in the news headlines what can happen when things aren't stored correctly or transported, because these are very volatile battery chemistries. So again, education is incredibly important. Making sure that things are packaged correctly, fire suppression items are used, making sure that people understand how to actually even identify battery chemistry so they know what they're shipping, what's going on the road. We work with creating special packaging for batteries that have been stress tested or damaged. In our own facilities, we also have fire suppression racks and are working on new technologies, such as early detections that go in the bunghole of a drum. So if it started to off-gas or if the drum contents started to get hot, it would send a signal, Bluetooth signal, to the driver's phone to give them a heads up that they're about to have an occurrence, just to try and catch things ahead of time. Because all these things need to be done to ensure that these batteries move safely on the roads with all of us.
Absolutely. Darren, as a key logistics provider, developing North America into a successful battery and electric vehicle producing region will be highly dependent on the logistics network ability to scale and adapt. So what are some of the key considerations from your perspective that will determine North America's ability to achieve its electrification goals and stability goals that you say are inextricably linked?
Yeah, I think it's what we've highlighted earlier on the partnership side. I think, and you alluded to it, when you introduce, electrification and then also biofuels, hydrogen, you're going to have mixed fleets, and that does introduce a lot of complexity. So I think being nimble across the supply chain is going to be really important as this is new. We mentioned the partnerships. Just as an example, at Ryder, for 90 years we've been very good at maintaining, complex engines. And now you introduce these electric trucks, and I can't think of one time, our technician hadn't been excited to work on those trucks, get a new skill set, new certification, feels brand new and part of something new. So I think that's a great mindset as we move forward. Is to think forward, and to be nimble.
Yeah, excellent. Let's look at potential road bumps in this roadmap, in this journey that we're on. There's already rumblings that shortages of supply of raw materials critical for battery manufacturing could be the new semiconductor crisis. Chris, how are you preparing for this? And do you have lessons learned from how you've handled the semiconductor shortage? Does it give you confidence? Is there robustness in your supply chain?
Well, I think the semiconductor shortage, obviously taught us a whole nother level of really, risk management, even much more so than what we learned back, 2011 from the tsunami and earthquake and all that. I think that it's really kind of pushing the need, and I think it was mentioned in one of the earlier discussions on, multiple sourcing, for example, of components. So maybe not just single sourcing, a tier one part globally. There's a need that's going to be, whether it's dual or beyond sourcing, to make sure that we've got alternatives when it comes to supply. And we're seeing that evolve into, everything we're doing around, development for battery supply, for all the other kind of technology needs that come along with it. So I think we're going to see a much faster and needed strategic shift into, risk avoidance when it comes to supply. So that's a big part of it, at least that we're seeing.
Yeah. In terms of the global supply chain, the global operations, it's very regional dependent right now in terms of the manufacturing of batteries per se, but also the processing centers, which regions have the monopoly right now. So again, how are you trying to alleviate as much risk as possible to ensure that we don't get into that situation where you're reliant on a single country or a single source?
Well, it's going to be back to the older philosophy of, build where you sell and really buy where you build. So it's going to be really focused on the core regions and having all that infrastructure, resources, supply base, everything as much as possible within those core regions. And I think that's, really what a lot of companies kind of got away from, and now realizing that, from the risk avoidance side, that's really a critical component, and really trying to get back and really speed up that implementation.
Absolutely, and Stephanie, then going to you in terms of investing in that regionalization, localization. Can you share a little bit of information about recent announcements, your plans for North America, how you're devising those strategies, developing those plans to support customers like Chris?
So there's been a lot of announcements about gigafactories and things being placed here, so strategic placement around those, which would play into like our ESG goals as well. Everybody's focusing on sustainability, and shorter routes from facilities to a recycler makes it also less inexpensive. So that's key when focusing on our expansion plans.
Excellent. Darren, again, just going on those kind of possible road bumps and challenges that lie ahead, and you mentioned working with, say, electricity companies and new players, a different value chain. What are some of the unseen or uncommon areas of concern that our stakeholders should be aware of, around power usage considerations, or as we start to look into smart charging practices and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, right now there are a lot of obstacles to electrification. When you think of the time it takes to get an installation, especially a big infrastructure project done, the permitting that it takes, the utility coordination, there's lead times are long to get chargers right now. The TCO model not really panning out, in the early days, obviously, of a new technology. So there are a lot of obstacles. I mentioned I used to be at a utility company, but that really is the first call to make when you're thinking of electrifying a fleet. The charger installation and the switchgear and the panel is not probably the sexy part like the truck, but it is the necessary part, because you're not going to get very far without a charger. So that would be my recommendation there, but there's certainly a lot of obstacles. We've seen it ourselves. I mean, projects to get chargers on the ground that take over a year in some states. Not every state's the same. Or, depending, every facility is different too. Do you have single-phase power, three-phase power? You could be looking at a major electrical upgrade. So really getting out in front and having a look at your facility is critical. But yeah, there's no doubt some obstacles right now.
Great. I want to explore the end-of-life process, not least as we have Stephanie here as well. But just in terms of, what are the opportunities when it comes to battery recycling? And for instance, how much recycled material from an EV battery currently goes back into the automotive supply chain? And what can we do to sort of increase those levels?
So currently, not a lot of it actually goes back into the EV supply chain. Our processing right now allows it to go into different applications. The way that we're going to increase that in the future is we actually just announced a partnership with 6K to get our materials at the end back to cathode, so we'll be able to go right back into the ecosystem. Other things, any kind of advanced technologies are going to help even further past what we're discussing right now.
Excellent. And to the wider panel, how can other stakeholders, be it the car makers or tier suppliers, how can they contribute and collaborate as we start to build this circular economy, just to ensure we increase the levels of recycled content going back into the industry and reducing that waste?
Well, I think it's an opportunity really for the supply chain partners to be involved. First of all, whether it's on the parts transportation side, it can create, better synergies as far as, certain loops or certain ways to optimize the use of their resources. On the outbound side, it can be a similar situation that's creating more opportunities as well, whether it's almost like, when outbound carriers get an opportunity to move returned lease cars, right? Well, maybe this is creating some other avenue on the EV side to where we're consolidating returned units in a much better fashion than we do now, So I think there's definitely going to be opportunities that they can take advantage of. It's going to evolve out of the discussions, though, that we're all going to be having and ideas that they help bring. And I think that's yet to be seen. I think there's a lot of that going on, but it's going to have to just continue with idea sessions and, partnership type discussions on, how do we make this a long-term opportunity for everybody? And what does it do that really can help our partners, be more efficient and really take the most advantage of the resources they have.
Yeah, so is circular economy going to be a fundamental of logistics and supply chain network design kind of moving forward?
I think so, for sure. I think it's just going to be another factor in kind of as you say, circular. It's just going to, I think, help create a better opportunity to where we are more efficient in full loops, I guess, versus maybe the way things have always operated. So.
Excellent. Bringing Darren into this part of Ryder's end-of-life processes, be it on the lease side, perhaps. How are your processes and strategies developing around EV fleets, and what are you preparing for?
Yeah, I like the word opportunity. I think that's still to be determined, especially on the truck side, where there's only a handful that have even been in operation for a year or two. So end of life seems like a long time, but it's something we're thinking about now. Obviously, sustainability is at the core of the company. We recycle all of our automotive waste streams at our maintenance facilities. So this falls right in line with, how do we, what does end of life look like? I've been a part of projects where you take old batteries and you use it as grid support for a charging station. But there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. I think there's a lot of different applications, a lot of different partners, like we're seeing with Stephanie, that are coming to market with some really, really neat ideas. And, it'll be quick. It seems far away in the truck space to talk about end of life when we're in the early days, but once it hits, it'll hit quick, and I think it'll be a major focus point.
And Chris, in terms of Nissan's service parts and end-of-life kind of process, looking at the aftermarket, the simple view would be in electric vehicles, there's less components, so a simplified supply chain, easier to manage. But are there, in fact, any additional complexities that you've seen with your current setup and that you foresee coming in the future? And for a considerable time, at least, while EVs grow and ICE vehicles remain on the road, are we going to, in fact, see a more complex network with increased parts?
I think it can be a bit more complex. I mean, there's laws out there that require us to maintain, certain years of inventory of aftermarket parts, like 10 years or more, and that automatically is going to cause the OEM. The OEMs are going to have to maintain all the ICE-related parts, for at least another 10 years, 15 years, depending on the component. And then, so as the EVs come on, usually they're going to be, at least in our world, they're replacing an ICE product. So I don't know that it really creates a bigger complexity as far as, number of parts being managed and things like that. The complexity will come on the kind of the battery-related, returns type, recycling, those types of needs and management requirements that are just will be increasing, but underneath that, I think as far as part counts, things like that, I don't know that it's going to create some huge change.
And Stephanie, on the sort of the handling of and kind of regulatory side, end-of-life processes, this is happening at a relatively small scale now. So what's going to need to happen in terms of that education piece, the increase in skilled workers able to operate kind of in this field, handling either end-of-life vehicles or the batteries themselves?
So I think there's two things here. So as far as regulations go, California is really leading the way, and I think other states are going to follow suit with requiring electric vehicles to be recycled. There's been a really successful program in place for lead batteries. 99% of them are returned and recycled, and so if something like that can be developed, the same for EVs, that's yet to be determined. Your note about workforce is a huge concern as we're all talking about ramping up. COVID has taught us a lot of things about staffing, but also this is a large increase, so finding talented and skilled employees is definitely a thought process for us right now, as far as recruiting, talent development, and obviously retention.
Excellent. So we heard in our opening session from the Department of Energy, very exciting opening keynote, record levels of investment going into charging networks being made available. From the industry's perspective, is there a gap between what's being offered, what's out there, versus the reality of kind of what you're seeing, what you see available, and how do we reduce that gap?
I think it's still yet to be seen what a gap would end up looking like. I mean, I think, kind of all the recent attention that's been brought, and then now the grants that will be available and some of the government support, things like that are realizations of speeding up something that I think most in the industry know is needed. So now it's going to speed it up, and it's almost like an example of the semiconductors again. It's like all of a sudden there's a much higher realization of the need for these types of infrastructures, and in order to get them, it's going to take a very large effort across, government, private, and then everybody involved. So, but as far as a gap, I think we're living in a gap right now, but it's a matter of, how fast this all comes through.
Absolutely. And on the infrastructure side, there's a lot of public announcement about charging infrastructure. It's typically for the end user. I'm interested in the commercial vehicle side, and where we see potential kind of bottlenecks, and where's the infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and capabilities really required, and going to have the most impact, be it kind of fleet depots, ports, dealerships, along major trucking routes, for example, processing yards, railheads. Again, maybe I'll start with you, Chris, but where do you see like the biggest need?
Well, there's definitely an infrastructure gap, and as far as you can't. I guess as it evolves, you'll focus on the key routes and corridors and things like that. But at the end of the day, you've got to have the infrastructure to go everywhere, and that's going to take time. And so I think the way things will start out, where there is infrastructure, but it's going to be utilized in much, I would say, smaller scales of utilization of electric trucks or any other kind of transportation solution. It'll be done in, I'll say, small loops, right, versus longer hauls and things like that, at least in the beginning, until that infrastructure gradually gets in place to where you can expand those loops.
Absolutely. And Darren, from your perspective, kind of looking across those networks, those routes, your own facilities, where do you see it as what's the sort of the timeline in terms of where you're investing, where you hope to see investment?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously applaud the investment that's being made now. We do see the majority of charging, especially early days, happening where the vehicles are domiciled. So, at the depot, at the location, ports are going to be big at first. So they're definitely, I mean, it's been said, there's a huge infrastructure gap already today. So those are some key areas. As far as what we would call over-the-road charging, I don't see that as really being not really happening right now, just because under the current charging standard, I mean, you're talking about pulling an electric truck to charge along the route, waiting 3-4 hours for a full charge. I mean, that's just not feasible. There is a standard that's being worked on that charges much faster. That sort of makes that come to life. But until that happens, I think most of the charging will continue to happen either at one of our facilities or wherever the vehicle is domiciled.
Excellent. Looking at electrification of product ranges. It's a key component of the roadmap to carbon neutrality, which has been very sort of publicized, the industry's goals, government's goals. A key element to this road to zero, or net zero, is logistics and supply chain, of course. Is the transportation sector keeping pace? Again, the passenger side is very much in the public eye. But transportation, in terms of getting down to decarbonization, is it keeping pace? Darren, I'll come to you first as Ryder.
Yeah, I think we're all, we're invested in, I think, you look at the number of people interested in this panel that are here today. I think everyone's invested in this. It's hard to say what the pace is because it's such early days, especially on the commercial sector. You think at the Nissan Leaf was 2011, 2012, that first came out, that was sort of revolutionary. That was really only 10 years ago, which when you think about the history of the automotive world is a pretty short amount of time. So I think there's a lot of different players, a lot of investment. There's billions being poured into keeping pace. So I think that pace is still yet to be determined in a way, but certainly the dollars are there and the commitment's there.
Absolutely. And Chris, I understand Nissan are starting to run some pilot schemes of their own in terms of alternative fuel, in terms of the trucks, using parts of your network. Can you share some more details on this?
Yeah, but we're implementing a couple different pilot programs. One with one of our main outbound logistics partners, we're going to implement utilizing some electric-powered trucks in California in a small loop kind of scenario, like I mentioned, so that they can be utilized and basically only have to charge, maybe once a day or something like that, in line with driver hours and everything else. And then we're also just recently started working. We're going to do the same in Mexico, actually, with a company that'll probably be the first ones to bring electric-powered trucks to the auto delivery market.
Okay, and can you compare sort of California and Mexico, or is it a completely different?
They're two different technologies that are being looked at. So I'm sure at some point there will be a comparison, but we're not there yet as far as really having a good feel for how each is operating. But I think eventually, if the technology is working much better for one versus another, then it may force kind of the move toward that one and away from the other. Yep.
Absolutely. And then if successful, the ability to scale across the wider network, across the region, is there kind of a roadmap in place or expectation?
We have a draft vision, I would say. But again, I think we need to get through kind of this first phase of, how well can this work be utilized and make sense? And then if it does, then how do you expand it? And probably an expansion would look like, other pockets, right, around the United States or in Mexico. Yeah.
And Stephanie, Cirba's strategy is clearly around recycling, reusing, reducing that waste. But how is your own decarbonization of your logistics operations and services? How does that roadmap look? Is it in line with what we're seeing from more traditional players within the automotive industry?
So we are in the beginning of our sustainability journey. We're actually going through scope 1 and 2 right now of creating our own ESG report and trying to understand like a baseline of where we're actually at right now. But in the interim, we are looking at options for like alternative fuels. We also, in our expansion, having shorter distances for transport, using smaller trucks. Whenever we send out our own fleet, our FTLs, we always ensure that they have backhaul so they're not running in on empty space, but we're definitely invested in it as much as everybody else, but we're still very much at the beginning of it.
Excellent. And I should say to our audience, if you have questions, then please, we do have a roaming mic, so if anyone does have any questions, please take advantage. We're getting into the last couple of minutes now. Just while you're thinking about those questions, Chris, you've already mentioned Nissan's EV plans, what it looks like. But can you expand a little bit more on what it looks like for the remainder of 2020, and perhaps the support that you're looking for from your partners that can help you achieve this vision in terms of electrification?
I mean, North America is our biggest market globally. So obviously, you know, there's going to be a lot of, I would say, change and really investment into the region here. And we've already announced a major investment in our Mississippi plant. We announced another significant investment in our Mexico plant, in one of them. And so to me, that just shows, I think, our commitment, you know, as far as the evolution from where we're at today into something that's got a lot more EV focus, you know, within the plan. It's still going to be a mixed bag, though, as was also mentioned earlier. It's not all going to be EV, right? You're going to have a balance for a number of years between EV and ICE-related products. So I guess, you know, for our partners, it's kind of a, you know, patience factor of, you know, we don't want to overestimate, we don't want to overcommit to things that may or may not happen. It needs to be more of a logical joint discussion approach of what's realistic, you know, and then once you understand what you truly believe is realistic, then you work together on how do you create the right solution to support what reality is probably going to be versus all these huge, you know, forecasts that everybody's been throwing out there. So.
Excellent. So opportunities out there and collaboration clearly key to the success moving forward. So we're into the final minute or so. So I just want to come to each of you and get your final thoughts. Electric vehicles and battery supply chain, it's a huge topic area. We've covered many of them, but you know, I hope that the conversations can go much deeper following this. But what are your final thoughts, final takeaways for our audience from today's discussion? Darren, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think the themes have been, you know, the amount of dollars just from the very beginning that the federal government's pouring into all the companies in here. So I think the commitment is unquestionable. You know, on our side, it's, you know, putting and charging our facilities. You know, I mentioned training technicians, doing all the upfits needed in a facility. You know, I think mobile maintenance will be a good platform. You mentioned running out of charge. My first EV was a 2015 Nissan Leaf, and there was a thing called turtle mode. If you got too low on battery, and turtle mode's not good. It shuts off the air, heat. You can only go a certain speed. That happened to me once, but thinking about that in a grand scale of, you know, a truck running out of charge, or, you know, what does that look like? So that actually just had me thinking. So, but I think the themes are partnerships, being nimble, and then just the amount of investment in there shows the commitment, I think.
Excellent. Stephanie, coming to you. Final thoughts, please.
I think I'll just reiterate collaboration and education. We always use an analogy around work that it feels like we're all on a bus and we're traveling 200 miles per hour down the road and we're trying to change a flat tire at the same time. But the good news is there's a lot of people on the bus. There's a lot of people involved. You know, everybody wants to help change that tire. So as long as we all work together, I think that we'll be in a good place.
Yeah, excellent. And then Chris, final thoughts on you?
I think really, and Darren touched on it probably best, it was, you know, you see all these plans and you're talking, you know, 8 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, 20 years out. That'll be here before we know it, especially in automotive. That's not very long at all. So, you know, the time of planning and really developing, you know, the right kind of infrastructure around whatever we're doing, it takes a lot of time. So therefore, it's already here, right? So we've got to keep advancing so that we're ready. Yeah.
Excellent. So plenty of food for thought there. And yeah, big round of applause to our panel. So thank you very much.